Clark, are you thinking of becoming Superboy?
I'm not sure that I have a choice.
I understand. Just know that your pa and I are sure you'll do the right thing.
Thanks, Ma.
I'm not here to hurt you, and your weapons can't harm me.
Who are you?
I'm called Superboy.
Stop!
On the 8th of October 1988, Superboy flew onto the small screen in the United States and made its debut in the UK in January of 1989. The show was produced by Alexander and Ilya Solkind, who produced the hugely popular live-action Superman film starring Christopher Reeve. When the Solkinds acquired the license to make Superman in the 70s, they'd also had the rights to Supergirl and Superboy. Supergirl was made into a feature film in 1984, but proved a financial failure. The Solkinds decided to sell the rights to Superman to the Cannon Group in 1985, but Cannon spent little money on Superman 4 due to their many financial blunders, and it was critically panned and failed at the box office. The Solkinds still retained the Superboy license and were approached with the idea of bringing the teen superhero to the small screen. Alexander and Ilya had never made productions for television and had to hastily find people to help them get it off the ground. Despite Alexander's name being attached, he had no involvement on the show. The responsibility of getting it into production fell into his son Ilya. Superboy had been erased from the comics at the time due to the reboot of Superman by John Byrne, in which Clark becomes the superhero when he is an adult, very much like in Superman the movie. He never wore the classic suit as a kid and teenager, but this didn't deter the producers with continuing with Superboy. This would very much be its own thing, but some people were a little confused with its connection to the films. It borrowed a few ideas and the costume was very much similar to Christopher Reeve's, but it was set in its own universe. Other producers had tried to make a Superboy series back in the early 60s to capitalise on the success of the adventures of Superman, but only got to the stage of shooting a pilot, despite having 12 scripts prepared, and it never got picked up for syndication. Superboy was the first weekly TV series to be produced at the new Disney MGM studios. For the second season onwards, the series moved down the road to Universal Studios Florida, the largest motion picture and television sound facility outside Hollywood. Warner Brothers had by no means been given exclusive rights to produce or distribute anything the Solkinds produced based on the Superman properties. For example, Supergirl was handled by TriStar. Alexander and Ilya were not obliged to use them to distribute the series and decided to team up with Viacom to distribute the show. Warner Brothers never made any money from the TV series despite owning the Superboy property and DC Comics, but eventually owned the entire 4 series in 2006 when they struck a deal with Ilya and Viacom. With Ilya Solkind producing, he brought on some of the crew from the Superman films, the line producer Robert Simmons, casting agent Lynn Stallmaster, Bob Harmon who dealt with the wire work, and Academy Award-winning special effects technician Colin Chilvers. Colin had just directed the Smooth Criminal short story for Moonwalker. Colin and even Jackie Cooper, who played Perry White, would take on the roles of director to handle some episodes. Superboy was brought to life by many actual comic book writers. From the second half of the first season onwards, Superman editors Mike Carlin and Andrew Helfer penned several episodes such as The Alien Solution, its sequel Revenge of the Alien, and The Bride of Bizarro. Other comic book writers that contributed to the series including Denny O'Neil and Carrie Bates. At first, much of the action is focused around stories that Clark and TJ report on for the college newspaper, the Schuster Herald. All the exterior scenes shot at Schuster University are actually filmed on the main campus of the University of Central Florida. John Newton, being only 24 at the time, had studied acting in New York for 2 years, and while on vacation visiting relatives in North Carolina, he visited some casting agents and he was offered to audition for a role in Weekend at Bernie's. The casting director thought he would be good for this new series coming out called Superboy, and he was flown back to New York for the initial screen test. He had a second screen test in Florida and wore Christopher Reeve's outfit and impressed the producers so much he got the part. After John had finished working on Superboy, he went on to star in a number of movies, such as Alive, but his career never really took off, and he later moved away from acting and focused on his own business of spiritual healing, which has proven very successful. Stacy Haiduk plays Lana Lang throughout all 4 seasons. She became the most popular actress to portray Lana. Being best friends with Clark, she is also in love with Superboy. Stacy and John actually had an off-screen romance throughout the entire first season, which certainly helped with their on-screen chemistry. Stacy excelled at showing her emotions on camera and managed to capture the spirit of Lana from the comics, making the role her own. Jim Calvert plays TJ White, the son of Daily Planet editor Perry White. TJ is Clark's roommate at university and, like Jimmy Olsen, will get into trouble each week and need to be saved by Superboy. The actor Jim at the time didn't know what the TJ meant and made up his own name and called himself Trevor Jenkins, later discovering they used his made-up name in the comics. Superboy's nemesis Lex Luthor is played by Scott James Wells and is introduced in the first episode broadcast as Clark's classmate at Schuster University. This version of Luthor spent most of his time fixing basketball games and humiliating Superboy. But in the season 1 finale, Luthor Unleashed, the writers completely changed his character. This episode adapted Lex Luthor's comic book origin, in which Superboy rescues Lex from a lab accident that causes him to lose all his hair. Luthor blames Superboy for his hair loss and gains a new, more intense hatred for the Boy of Steel. Now, season 1 is often regarded as the weakest down to the show having bland villains such as bank robbers, corrupt landowners and generic gangsters. The first half of the season, the producers were still trying to determine what direction to take the show and establishing the right tone and approach. By the second half, more supernatural villains were introduced to make it feel more like a comic book show to satisfy its critics and growing fan base. 13 episodes were initially filmed for season 1, beginning with Countdown to Nowhere. This episode was intended to be the pilot and featured Superboy's first public appearance as he prevents a group of saboteurs from selling a powerful laser weapon developed by the US government to an arms dealer. The episode exists in 2 versions, an uncut version in which the story plays in the present day, and a second version in which the main story is introduced as a flashback through additional scenes with Lana, Clark and TJ. The second version contains some scenes that are cut from the main story in order to fit the flashbacks in. This version was actually aired as the 5th episode in the series, despite its events appearing earlier in Superboy's timeline. It also appears as the 5th episode on the first season DVD set. So what episodes are worth watching? There are 26 episodes in each season, which even now seems a lot for a show. The first season focuses on Superboy and his alter ego Clark Kent, his childhood friend and love interest Lana Lang, and his college roommate TJ White. Every week Lana and TJ would get into trouble and Superboy would have to save them. When it comes to the first season, I suggest you watch episode 5 first, Countdown to Nowhere, as it was the intended pilot, and the following ones which I recommend you check out. Episode 9, The Alien Solution, where an alien spirit seeks a body and wants to take over Superboy. It inhabits the body of a samurai and turns up at the school to find Kal-El. Strangely, the episode opens with footage from the pilot to set up the alien's first observation of the teen superhero. This is the first episode in which any supernatural villain makes an appearance, and when the show starts to become confident with its direction, Superboy actually leaves Earth in his attempts to chase after the evil spirit, so it definitely offers something in line with the comics. Episode 12, Kryptonite Kills, is Clark's first introduction to deadly kryptonite. In reference to the movies, the kryptonite is located in Addis Ababa. Clark realises it's his only weakness, and Lex uses it as a new power source. Episode 13 and 14 is a 2-parter, in which the alien from episode 9 returns. After being trapped in a gas canister, it is let loose and takes over a military guy, and he attempts to kill Superboy. The scene does have a blatant dummy being blown up, which is hilarious, but the action is pretty cool and it has some nice wire work. His father Jonathan Kent is the next victim to be possessed. The actor playing Jonathan, in my eyes, looks a lot like director Richard Donner. Episode 16 introduces the popular comic book villain, Mcalister. The episode is not really action-packed and focuses around comedy as Mcalister transforms into Clark Kent and starts to hit on Lana. This is an enjoyable episode and demonstrates another level of John's acting abilities. If you have the DVD, the episode comes with a funny commentary with John and Ilya Solkind. Episode 24, called Hollywood, sees Superboy being tricked by a scientist into travelling back into time to 1939. He saves an actress who is researching a role as a homeless person. She takes a shine to him and falls in love with him, but Clark needs to return back to his own time. This is definitely one of the stronger episodes when it comes to the story. It feels very much like an old episode of Star Trek where Kirk and his crew end up in the past. The final episode of the season is called Luthor Unleashed. Luthor loses his hair after an experiment has gone bad and blames Superboy, which is actually taken directly from the comics. If you are an avid collector, you'll probably notice many comparisons they tried to keep in keeping the show faithful, especially with Season 2. In his attempts to get revenge, Lex enlists an overweight ninja, Indiana Jones and Sinbad, and they battle it out in a small field. Lex is defeated, but inevitably plans his revenge. The second season debuted 5 months after the finale of Season 1, and drastic changes were made. To many it felt like an entirely new show. John Newton was replaced by Gerard Christopher in the lead role. Online claims suggest the recasting was a result of John getting a DUI and asking for more money, leading to him being replaced. Now, John has openly discussed the true reasons as to why he left the show. The DUI reports are apparently entirely untrue. During the second half of the first season, John was offered more money for the next batch of 13 episodes, down to the risk involved. John had nearly lost his life twice on the show due to the incidents using the wires. The Solkinds thought Viacom should cough up the money, but they said no, feeling the Solkinds should adjust a budget to compensate John. John was ordered by Viacom to return for the shooting at the same pay. During that time, John had gotten into a bit of trouble parking on illegal property, and he wrote a letter of apology to the local sheriff, but that letter was intercepted by a local newspaper, and they twisted what John wrote. John said he was young and stupid and should have resolved the issue through the proper channels, but Viacom used this as a way to make him accept the same wage or leave the show. John declined to return, but in hindsight wished he had not been so hasty to quit. So in steps Juilliard-trained actor Gerard Christopher, who was a whopping 30 years old at the time, making him older than Christopher Reeve, Dean Cain, Brandon Routh and Henry Cavill when they made their debuts as Superman. Gerard went with a different approach in portraying Clark Kent and Superboy, taking on the clumsy and bumbling persona of Clark from the movies and showing a more aggressive and macho version of Superboy. There was also a change in the outfits. The S symbol was larger and the cape took on a more bulky look. Instead of being tucked into his top, you can see it's button on, making it easier for the actor to change outfits. In one scene you actually see the cape unbutton, an error they left in the shot. Funnily enough, in the episode Nightmare Island, Superboy's suit gets ripped, but instead of damaging his new redesigned suit, they changed the top half to John's old suit. Gerard's new suit was probably the closest to how Superman looked in the comics at the time, taking on the visual style of John Byrne's recent reboot of Superman. TJ was also removed from the show, and Clark had a new roommate called Andy Mcalister, played by Ilan Mitchell-Smith. I'm sure many of you recognise him from Weird Science. Andy Mcalister was very different from TJ and was constantly looking to make money with his get-rich-quick schemes. He also flirted with Lana frequently, and his advances were always refused, though Lana still considered Andy a friend despite his character being a massive perv. Scott Wells was also replaced by Sherman Howard as Lex Luthor. Sherman is probably best known as the zombie Bub from Day of the Dead. Scott was heavily criticised for his performance as Lex and even required an acting coach on set to help him with the dialogue. I'm surprised he even got the job. His performance was hilariously wooden. Thankfully, with Sherman's superior acting skills, they provided a far more dark and crazy version of Lex, often providing a lot of the humour for the show. The villains and the pace of the show was amped up in the second season. There was certainly more violence, with people being shot, stabbed and murdered. Additional comic book characters were introduced to the series, many of them appearing for the first time in live action form. You have Metallo, who bears little resemblance to his comic book counterpart, and looks more like David Jason from Only Fools and Horses.
I don't believe it. What a plonker. What a plonker.
Bizarro made his debut and would return in the later series, as well as the Yellow Perry. Mxyzptlk made a return appearance, turning up with Richard Kiel, who played Jaws from The Spy Who Loved Me. Gilbert Godfried appeared in 2 episodes as a nasty, wisecracking criminal genius named Knick-Knack, who used toys to commit crimes. Basically, he is the Toy Man. I'm not sure why they couldn't have used the same name. When Season 2 started, DC Comics brought back Superboy for his own series of comics based on the show, lasting for 22 issues. The first issue had a photo from the new series with Gerard holding Stacy. This was the first I knew about the new casting of Superboy when I picked it up as a kid. So for the episodes I recommend for Season 2, Episode 1 and 2 introduced a new Lex Luthor and explains his totally far-fetched change of appearance, spending the first half looking like Darkman. The episode reveals Luthor had plastic surgery to assume the appearance of Warren Eckworth, the wealthy investor of the Superboy gun, which Luthor believed could kill Superboy. It's a fun 2-part episode that sets the tone on what the rest of the show will be like, and lets Gerard show off his new version of Superboy. Episode 4, Young Dracula, is actually co-written by Ilya Salkind. Byron Shelley, a half-vampire, escapes his father and becomes a doctor in Capital City Hospital. Byron befriends Superboy and reveals that he has researched a serum which can temporarily suppress his vampiric powers. For example, he can walk around during the day. His father sends an older, more powerful vampire to bring him back, and Superboy and Lana are trapped in the middle of the battle. Another fun and silly episode, and the vampire looks like he borrowed his outfit from a Halloween fancy dress shop. Episodes 6 and 7 introduce Bizarro. Professor Peterson is testing his new duplicating ray. Superboy arrives to see his progress. Lightning causes a power surge, which in turn causes the ray to hit Superboy. The result is Bizarro, an imperfect duplicate of Superboy who possesses all of his powers, but a very limited intelligence. If you own the original comic of Bizarro's first appearance, you will see the director staying faithful to the original comic book panels. Bizarro wreaks havoc and Superboy determines that he must destroy Bizarro with Kryptonite. It's a great 2-part episode and is one of the highlights of the season, and remains one of the most popular with Superboy fans. Bizarro always makes for a fun villain, even in the cartoons. Episode 9, Programmed for Death. A robot has reprogrammed itself, taking on the personality of Andy's father, and seeks to avenge the death of its creator by killing both Andy and his real father, and Superboy gets caught in the middle. This episode actually demonstrates a slightly darker tone to the series. Episode 12, Superboy Rest in Peace, is basically a rip-off of the Terminator story featuring the guy who turned up in the Living Daylights. This episode is entertaining and also hilarious. The actor Andreas can't fight to save his life, so they use a double which is clearly obvious during the punch-ups, as the stunt guy looks nothing like him. The episode featured guest star Betsy Russell, who was reunited with Gerard after the two had worked together in the 1985 movie Tomboy. Episode 13, Super Menace, while running tests on Kryptonite at a military facility to neutralise its effects on Superboy. They find that the alteration has emotional effects, making Superboy turn evil. The military enlists the help of Metallo from an earlier episode. After some persuasion, Superboy teams up with Metallo and they wreak havoc on the city. Definitely a superior episode to the previous Metallo episode, and it's always fun seeing Kal-El turn evil. Episode 15, Microboy, is a fun episode but rather silly at the same time. A guy falls in love with Lana, like most of the new characters thrown into the show, and wants to become a superhero, and absorbs tons of radiation to gain superhuman powers. His outfit is one of the worst I've seen on the show. It's beyond cheap, but apart from that minor issue, it's still fun to watch. Episode 18 and 19, Abandon Earth and Escape to Earth, stars one-time James Bond George Lazenby and Bond girl Britt Ekland. This is the first episode in which Superboy discovers his past and his parents, but he is tricked into leaving Earth, not knowing his parents are imposters. Highly recommended episode because it deals with his backstory and has lots of sci-fi content. But it's let down at the end because Superboy and Lana are sent back in time before his fake parents turn up, so everything he learned about his past is now gone. Episode 21, Knick-Knack, a demented electronics genius with an affinity for toys, who was imprisoned because of Superboy, escapes. He uses his genius to develop a mechanical suit that sucks away Superboy's powers. A very funny episode down to comedian Gilbert. He seems to ad-lib in most of his scenes. Always great watching him shout out all his dialogue. Episode 22, The Haunting of Andy Mcalister. Clark, Andy and Lana visit Andy's uncle's mansion for the weekend, only to become trapped in a wall containing a world with ghosts from the Wild West. A group of outlaws seek revenge against Andy's ancestor who put them there. This episode is very much like an old episode of Scooby-Doo and a lot of fun. And the final episode I recommend is episode 25, Johnny Casanova. A hilarious episode as a regular guy drinks some potion and becomes Johnny Casanova. a much less attractive slob, but has the ability to charm people. Casanova uses his powers to make these mob enforcers friendly, and Lana fall in love with him, but it seems Superboy is not affected. Not much of Superboy is in it, but the strong comedy kept me entertained thanks to co-star Mark Holton. When it comes to the visual effects of the show, they were done very much on the cheap, which was to be expected with a TV series. Despite this, the wire work was exceptionally good, far better than what you would later see on the Lois and Clark series. However, you can have the best wire work team in the business, but if the actor doesn't move in the correct way or hold his body right, then the illusion of flight is ruined and just ends up looking awkward and obvious to the viewers it's just someone dangling from wires. When it comes to comparing John and Gerard, I personally think John is the better of the two when it comes to the flying. His takeoffs and landings seem more fluid and elegant, and when it comes to the blue screen shots, John would move his arms to change his direction. With John having a good knowledge of martial arts, he would subtly incorporate ways to demonstrate his techniques into the flying. The Post group handled the visual effects compositing for the first season, and Century 3 for season 2. When it came to the blue screen work, I think it actually got worse for the following season. For a start, there were far less composited flying shots, and when the FX team did them, the colour of his suit was not correct, and the matte lines were highly visible. In the first season, you have Superboy flying a lot from one location to the other, mostly consisting of blue screen. Yeah, it wasn't up to the standards of the movies, but added more to capture the imagination of the kids watching. One episode has Superboy in space, and when they do the same thing in season 2, the effects look far weaker. It appears they have limited the amount of compositing work and budget for that area, and when it came to the flying, they just used wire shots for the taking off and landing, and ignored the shots of Superboy travelling to his next location. The wires are often more visible in season 1, and the harness often rides up during the blue screen shots. But all round, the wire work was great to watch, but sadly all the added video effects of lightning and explosions is very much to the standard of what you would expect from a TV show on a tight budget. During the end credits for the first season, it says the show was edited on a CMX 6000. Now you may think, what the hell is that? Well, it was a Laserdisc editing suite, so all the dailies were transferred over to Laserdisc for the editor to use, and then they would create a rough cut quickly to see the final results. It works very much like editing software works today. You can just search up the footage you want and edit it together. This new system didn't really last long because it was replaced by digital backups, instead of transferring everything to Laserdisc, but nonetheless a nifty and unique way to edit. Kevin Kiner, best known for his work on the Star Wars Clone series, composed the music for all 4 seasons of Superboy. Kevin has been providing music for TV shows for years, working on many popular series. On his website resume, he doesn't list Superboy. I hope he isn't embarrassed of his work, because I think the music for the show is a lot of fun and very memorable. For season 1, he manages to create a theme that sees the music speak the words Superboy, very much like John Williams' theme musically sounding like Superman. It's a contemporary sound and with a lot of synthesizer mixed with electric guitar. Kevin made adjustments to the theme throughout the first season, but they never sound as good as the first version he produced. For season 2, a new variation on the theme is created and it strikes a more serious tone, taking out the electric guitar. It basically sounds like a keyboard replicating an orchestra. There is no soundtrack release of his work on Superboy, not even bootlegs of his music. The only music you can enjoy and listen to is the opening and end title music that accompanies each episode. One track for the opening theme for season 3 was released as part of a 75th anniversary CD celebrating the music of DC Comics. I first saw Superboy when it aired on UK television on ITV, well, Angular TV at the time, and I was blown away on my first initial viewing. My obsession with Superman the movie was just kicking in, and now I had a weekly show on Superboy to watch. He had the same suit as Superman, and it had loads of cool flying shots. For me, I loved watching Superboy jump into action. As a kid, I didn't really give a damn about the stories and just wanted to see Superboy. I was only 6 years old, so it was all about the action. I don't believe they showed all 26 episodes at the time, and maybe only broadcast the first 13, because I would have made the effort to tune in every week. I only saw a few episodes and didn't see the rest until later on satellite TV. Whenever I spoke with my friends about Superboy in my 20s, they would always give me this blank expression, or they would say they'd never seen it or maybe had a vague memory of it. Usually the opening sequence and the bridge often triggered people's memories of the show. Season 2 of Superboy never aired on regular TV in the UK, nor did the first season get a repeat. Luckily my parents had cable TV, and season 1 was shown again on Sky 1 on the show DJ Cat. Before the DVDs were finally released, many fans had to acquire them through bootleg copies. Gerard Christopher was even selling copies of his own episodes to help support the fans to complete their collection. Many of the bootlegs by the fans from season 2 onwards have the Sky 1 or Sky 2 logo in the top corner. They did continue to broadcast the series to the late 90s on UK satellite TV, which I was never aware of. They must have shown it very early in the morning or kept changing the time slots. If you have never seen this show before and you are say over 15 years old, you may find the show to be totally cheesy and cheap in many areas. But in its defence, many shows during the 80s and even say the 70s were very cheap. The quality of TV shows today is to a much higher standard, matching the quality of film. Superboy was shot on 35mm, but it appears the original prints have been lost or destroyed. All that remains are broadcast tapes, which are of a standard resolution. The effects may look worse in HD when viewed today, but I'm sure a lot of the effort that has been put into the lighting and colour of the show would look far superior at a higher resolution. Season 1 certainly has more dull episodes than good ones. Some episodes are just hilariously bad, like episode 6 where Lana falls in love with a rock star, episode 15 where TJ does stand-up comedy, and episode 23 with Superboy going undercover in a punk nightclub. A lot of the episodes which I didn't recommend but aren't awful are just highly forgettable, mostly down to the generic storylines, but they do have some cool scenes with Superboy and some nifty wire work, and one episode has an early performance of Joaquin Phoenix, which I'm sure he would like to forget about. But in all, that's not enough to warrant sitting through an entire episode. Season 2 is certainly the superior show, benefiting from more collaboration with DC writers, so it has a stronger connection to the comics. The show knows what it is from the get-go. The editing and pacing of the series is far more energetic. They try and take full advantage of the short running time of 20 minutes, which is also a problem. Having a live action show which is 20 minutes long is not enough to get a fully satisfying story. In many of the decent episodes, usually written by Cary Bates and Mark Jones, their stories are usually restricted by the running time. The episodes start out well with an interesting story, but as soon as it gets really involved, it just quickly comes to an end. Usually Superboy jumping into action and beats the guy up in a split second. Superboy is certainly weaker than when he becomes Superman, and he's not totally invincible, so it does create some suspense but very little in the grand scheme of things. I really think what would have made the series more polished is half the amount of episodes produced and extend the runtime to 40 minutes, very much like the Flash 1990 series. With the added runtime you can do so much more, and with the reduced output of episodes they could save the money and invest it into the production design and visual effects. None of the episodes create a long-running story arc which require you to own both series, so you can just put on any episodes and get straight into the show. For an adult watching these, they have simple stories that don't create compelling viewing, but also you have to remember it's entertainment aimed at children and younger teenagers. Adults can certainly enjoy them, but don't expect anything too deep or complicated with its stories. It's light entertainment. Season 1 is very easy to track down, but for Season 2 you can only really acquire it through Warner Brothers' online shop, but sadly they don't ship outside the US, so the best bet is through a private seller on Amazon, which I took advantage of. If you are based in the States, the series is also available on iTunes. So which actor portraying Superboy is the best? They both have their pros and cons. John, as I said earlier, is the best of the two when it comes to the flying. I prefer his suit as well for some reason, probably down to it resembling Chris Reeves more. His version of Clark isn't really played for laughs, it's more in line with George Reeves' style. John said Clark wouldn't act bumbling in his younger years because he is still trying to find himself, and his disguise wouldn't be fully developed until he leaves for Metropolis. If you see John in interviews, he pretty much acts the same as Clark, so there is a lot of his own personality traits in the character, but with a little effort in making a difference between the roles, it makes it more obvious that he is Superboy. Maybe it being down to him being the first incarnation of Superboy I saw, I sort of have a soft spot for John's version. With Gerard you certainly get a more experienced actor. He feels more confident on camera, and with him creating a more Chris Reeve-like Clark, it certainly gave the show plenty of humour. This was definitely lacking from the first season, which wanted to go with a more serious tone. Gerard demonstrated he could handle the serious stuff but also could jump into the comedy moments when needed. Gerard helped the series' ratings a lot, so his approach appears to be what people wanted. The chemistry between the three leads worked far more successfully with the new character of Andy than the character of TJ. I think Andy is just a better written character, and as Island Mitchell-Smith was already an established actor, he had a stronger screen presence. I'm sure there are many people out there who didn't have a clue this show was even made, probably down to its poor syndication. It never came out on VHS and was rarely repeated throughout the world due to legal battles with the Salkinds and Warner Brothers. But thankfully all those issues are now resolved. If you are a fan of the Superman movies and especially the classic Superboy comics, you will definitely get some fun out of the early series. Season 2 is definitely more in line with the comics, but Season 1 does have its charm. It's an innocent program that, whilst trying to establish its direction, still has some nuggets of good stuff in it. Look out for Part 2, which sees Season 3 really kick the show up a gear, and Gerard Christopher makes the role of Superboy his own. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find more retrospective reviews by clicking on these videos. If you want to watch my upcoming reviews early before they go live on YouTube, you can support me through Patreon. Don't forget the poster designed by my talented artist Peter Bruce, celebrating 100 retrospectives, is still available to purchase. We ship worldwide and postage is affordable.